Let's get more now on that latest Climate Commission report. It shows leaders from developed countries, including Australia, have acknowledged there's an urgent need to tackle climate change and are starting to act. Professor Tim Flannery is the Chief Climate Commissioner and he joins us now from Canberra. Tim Flannery, good morning to you. Based on this latest report, how does the action being taken in Australia shape up with what's going on elsewhere in the world?
Well, we're in the middle of the pack. There's a lot of countries taking action now. There'll be 850 million people living in economies where there's some sort of carbon price. The instruments that are used vary, but in terms of the overall impact, we're around in the middle.
What more should Australia be doing, if anything?
Well, the world needs to really increase its ambition on this because the science is telling us that we're not doing enough yet. We're only achieving about half the emissions reductions that are required if we're to avoid the worst consequences of climate change. So it's important that the world increase its ambitions this decade, and Australia should be part of that action.
On that front, you mentioned the number of people covered by carbon pricing, but at the same time we have the world's biggest economy, the United States, not having a national carbon pricing scheme. How much is that dampening efforts to tackle global climate change?
Look, around about 70% of US emissions are already covered by regulation, so they're already bearing a cost. In jurisdictions such as California, there's a carbon trading scheme coming into play this year. And US emissions are reflecting that. They're already 7.6% below what they were in 2006. So the US is on track to achieve its obligations under the Copenhagen Accords, and that's good news.
Now, in terms of how the carbon tax is playing out in Australia, you've told an interviewer yesterday that Australians are being misled here by a couple of lies. What lies and who's telling them?
Well, the sorts of things that we hear, more in the past than now, thank heavens, were that, there was that the world isn't taking action on this and Australia's unimportant. I mean, the fact is, that Australia's the 15th largest emitter on the planet. We're one of the carbon heavy hitters, so what we do really counts and is watched. And of course, the world is taking action, as this report shows. So it's important that people understand, I think, what's happening globally because, the changes that have been put in place now are irreversible and unstoppable. The shift towards a clean energy economy is well and truly underway. The only question is whether we'll achieve it in time to avoid dangerous climate change.
Based on those figures you cited earlier, what do you say when you hear people like Greg Hunt, the Coalition's spokesman on this, say that the world is moving away from carbon pricing?
Well, look, I'm not sure that, that's an accurate view of either what he said or what the situation is.
That's a direct quote from Greg Hunt.
Well, I'd say that there's 850 million people around the world now living in economies with some sort of carbon price. And, from what we can see, that's going to continue to grow.
OK, now looking at ways of further improving our commitment to carbon pricing, there is a lot of debate around cutting the floor price for the carbon tax, closer to the emissions trading scheme coming in. Would you be against that, because the argument is if you do that, that could take away some of the incentive for polluters to stop emitting greenhouse gases?
Look, our report hasn't really looked into that at all, but what we can see is that we'll end up with a global carbon trading scheme at some point in the future, and they'll have to harmonise somehow, and that's how that's done exactly is an issue for those with kind of deep knowledge of those systems, really. And
I notice in the report you've compared the $23 per tonne carbon price in Australia internationally. How does it stack up to some of the other countries cited in this report?
Well, look, if you just look at the carbon price itself, it's really hard to say because the carbon prices are applied to different parts of the economy and different fuels and so forth. You've really got to look at the overall impact. And the overall impact of all carbon pricing for Australia and